Today we're talking about the right way to pitch a backpacking tent. So I've got two tents with me today that we're going to set up, a one-person tent and a three-person tent. The three-person tent is what I use when I'm backpacking with my wife and our dogs. Even without our dogs, it's just nice to sometimes have a little extra space. The one-person tent I use on kayaking trips where I'm by myself or with a group, but we each have our own tents, which is pretty common in the kayaking world because we have so much space in boats. So first I want to talk about some things that people do wrong when storing their tent. Store your tent dry. If you can, store it loosely. I remove the poles from the tent bags because that's how I pack it in a backpack. They should be separate. That'll be a separate video. Tents should be stored in a temperature controlled environment, so no crawl spaces, attics, garages. Mine live in my office behind my desk. You've seen them a million times. So let's go through the process of the right way to set up one of these tents. So your tent has really three parts that we're going to worry about today: poles, the tent body, and the tent fly. I am probably not going to put the fly on today just for clarity so you can see the shape of the tent. So we're going to find the four corners of our tent, lay out the poles on top of it, and then attach the poles to the tent, and then finally clip the tent to the poles. Because it's a little windy today, I'm going to go ahead and stake this tent out to start with. I've talked about these tent stakes before. This is what a tent stake should look like. This is a really nice MSR groundhog. Oh look, I actually managed to bend that one a little bit. That's hard to do, but they're really hard to break. So let's stake this out real quick in the four corners. Some things that I look for in a tent when I'm shopping: color-coded tabs that match up with edges of the pole. I also look for tents with a lot of ventilation, particularly here in the American South. Tents that house more than one person should have two doors and two vestibules. So it's a little windy today, so I decided to stake it out. If it wasn't windy, I might not do that. My friend Wayfinder Alley posted a video on her channel about pitching a tent in wind, particularly on a beach, and I'll link to that down below. Super good video. But now that I've got the tent staked out, I found the four corners, I'm going to set up the poles and align the poles with the tent, but I'm not attaching it yet. Okay, so now I've got the poles assembled and laid out over the tent in the way that they will go. And so there are some things to be aware of with this tent in particular. It has a foot end and a head end, and I know that from setting it up previously, but I also know that the poles are longer on this front piece, on this section of poles, which indicates that it's the head end because they're going to be taller. Some other things to look for when setting it up is if the tent has pieces like that, those face down to attach to the tent, and I've got them front and back, so that's something to look for. The next thing that we have to do is attach the poles to the grommets, and that's our next step. So poles and grommets in all four corners. This tent actually has a fifth grommet, and once you get that in, then the whole framework will stand up. And then this is super interesting. I'm really glad this happened. The fact that this pole didn't stay in here is just an indicator that this bungee is ready to be replaced. So I'm gonna link to the video that shows how to do that, but it's time for me to do that on this tent too. It can be a little bit harder to replace the bungees on tents that have hubbed pole sets like this one. In general, hubbed pole sets like this make pitching the tent much faster. You essentially have one set of poles, even though it's a big set, but it makes pitching the tent faster. Now that I've got the poles and the grommets, I've got a framework of poles set up, it's time to attach the clips to the poles themselves. The reason that we do the clips last is because it tensions the tent. It takes the tent from loose to tight. When we take the tent down, we're going to do the exact opposite order. So we're going to undo the clips, then we undo the 4 corners or the 5 grommets in the case of this tent, then we can fold everything up. So this is a 3-person tent. Let's do a 1-person tent next. It's a little bit different. So once again, I'm going to find the 4 corners, and this time they are color coordinated. I've got black tabs and I've got brown tabs, and those should match the poles. These are black and black. These are silver and brown. So it's obvious which way it's supposed to go, but I guess silver tabs are hard to do. Now that the poles are laid out, they're oriented correctly, we're just going to do the same thing. Put them in the 4 grommets, then connect the clips. Okay, some other things to think about while you're shopping for a tent. This 1-person tent is just 2 crossed poles, and what that gives you is a narrower top of the tent. So if you think about this as being, if it were a 2-person tent, with just 2 crossed poles, compared to another tent that is the same square footage, it's going to have less cubic feet compared to a tent that has a cross pole. So cross poles make it so that the sides of the tent can be more vertical and you get more space inside the tent. So if I were sleeping in a 2-person tent with just 2 cross poles with a friend of mine and we both sat up in the morning, our shoulders are either going to hit each other or we're going to hit nylon. Whereas if we're in a tent with a cross pole, there'll be more space. We can sit up in the morning and we won't be rubbing into each other or brushing into the tent, which is on a wet morning how you get wet, by touching the wall of the tent. Another question that I get frequently is, what is this piece that frequently comes with tents? And this is called a pole splint, and it's designed in case you break a pole, you would slide it over the pole directly where the break is, and then when the pole tensions, the bend in the pole will hold this in place. It's not a permanent fix, but it saves your weekend. So when I'm shopping for a 2-person tent, the things that I'm looking for are this: 2 doors, 2 vestibules, a crossbar of some point. If you're buying from a reputable company, everything should be factory seam sealed and ready to go. You shouldn't have to do anything. You will have to reapply the durable water repellent finish a year or 2 or 3 down the road. Then I'm going to store my tent dry in a temperature controlled space. So as I said, they live in my office with me. When shopping for a tent, you get 1, 2, 3, 4 and more person tents. And what that's referring to, a 1-person tent has space in it for 1 regular size sleeping pad. A regular size sleeping pad is 20 inches wide by 72 inches long. My 3-person tent will accommodate 3 of them. 4-person tent, the same. And so if you're using a pad that is oversized, either longer or wider, that can affect how well it will fit in the tent. And when I put my tents away, I stuff them. I don't fold them or roll them or anything like that, but do what works for you. I don't care. I don't think it matters. People make the argument that folding them creates creases. I don't think anyone can fold their tent that precisely every time. Some people also make the argument that by stuffing them, it's a little bit harder on the durable water repellent finish. Again, I don't think it's that big of a deal. If you're using your tent a lot, you're going to wear off the DWR coating anyway. So do what works for you. And so that is how you pitch and break down backpacking tents. A family size camping tent is similar. It just takes more time because you have to walk around it. When you're pitching a tent, you never want to walk on the tent because you can damage the mesh. But that's how we set up tents. That's how we break down tents. I think that's it for this week. I'll see you outside.